We had the parties out drinking till 4 a.m. after a boardroom meeting. We had parties going silent for almost a month, or actually a little bit longer. We had a retrospective earn-out period, which has never happened before in our experience in 13 or 14 years doing transactions. We're going to dive into it with Darren. Darren was point on the transaction, and let's share some insights. Tell us, first of all, just the headlines. What industry was the business, and what was the approximate sale price?
Yeah, no, thank you, Dan. So this business, it's an industrial painting business that typically operates and serves large mining customers and clients. In terms of sort of headline revenue numbers, we're talking between 3 and 4 million, with an adjusted underlying profit of about $1 million.
Mm-hmm. What was the biggest challenge in getting the buyer to agree with the numbers?
Well, I think there's two sides to this. So blue chip clients, fantastic. That looks great on paper. However, the flip side of that is that concentration to a few clients, where the majority of the revenue was driven from. Because
what are we talking majority? Like, what does that look like?
Oh, we're talking probably 60 to 70% was between two major customers.
Yeah.
Of the entire revenue base.
Yeah.
When we're talking clients, active, ongoing clients delivering, a significant amount of revenue, 5 or 6, probably 5, I think it was, with a few very small outliers in there. So I think the key thing with this was the contracts that our client had with those customers, because that's then what really underpinned the value of the business. And as we went through this, I think one contract was about to expire. One had only just been signed and was in its infancy, and another one was expiring as well. Not to go too far into the deal at this sort of time, but one of those contracts then got split into two because of the relationship of how the mine was owned between two operating entities. So it was quite a moving time and quite fast-paced in some areas, but then slow in others, in terms of ensuring that we could navigate all these parts of the client base and those contracts to ensure that presenting back to the buyer, there was a robust understanding of a committed revenue pool that they could have as a baseline to move forward with, to give them certainty that what they're buying will stick.
Why do you think the buyer, because I know that you had a lot of private operator investors looking at the business, and there was, a lot looking at it, but probably a small handful that were genuinely serious. And they all basically walked away because of the concentration issue. They were private investors. The buyers were actually strategic buyers and were publicly listed. But what was it about the business that attracted the strategic buyer?
Yeah, I think with that, what we've got here is the vision and clarity of having a strategic buyer inside the overall industry. This strategic buyer not only operated in a similar sort of space as our client, but had multiple other services that would service that client base. For them, they saw this as an opportunity to bring that specialized skill set in. And by doing that, with the reputation, with the safety performance record of this business, which is of paramount in that industry, that they were then able to utilize that to go in and sell their other services to those clients. So this to them was as much as bringing that in as opening up new avenues.
It's a foot in the door.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Whereas I think what you're touching on there is with those investors that really are coming from outside, they're really just looking at this in terms of a spreadsheet. There's revenue, there's cost, there's my profit, there's the price, that's my likely return. Oh, customer concentration, I lose them, I'm out. They weren't in a position to use it as a platform to get a foot in the door into other revenue streams. So that's why for this particular business, that strategic buyer was the best fit.
This is actually a really good example of how customer concentration, when the fit is right on the buy side and when the buyer has the proper motivations, I think it really points out how important it is to get the skeletons out early on, because it helps you to identify what sort of buyer pool you need to actually engineer. And any private investor, as an example, is just going to find that level of customer risk really, really, then will walk away. I'm just thinking about when this deal actually progressed, because I remember that you were sitting around the table with both parties in a boardroom. effectively verbalizing the terms of the deal. Nothing was signed yet. It was just get the parties in a room and actually let's nut out the deal and the key terms that need to support that deal. And the parties went out afterwards, drinking, celebrating till really like the next day. And then what happened after that point?
Do you know what? It's a couple of things going on there, I think, because in a way it's fantastic to celebrate what had been verbalized in terms of agreement. Although nothing had been signed, there was no ink on paper. Mm-hmm. So in some ways you could argue it's a little bit premature to have gone out and done that. But then what happened is the silence that came after that meeting. Now, if we just look at where we were in the year, so this was October, November time. So admittedly, within this quiet period, we had a Christmas kind of close down. That industry, does follow that quite robustly.
Sorry, just back up. What do you mean everything went quiet?
Well, we've gone from a position of sitting in a board meeting with the keys in the room, agreeing the deal. And basically, I think from my expectation was prior to Christmas shutdown, the document's going to be signed, ink's going to hit paper, everything's going to be done. People will come back in January, we move forward. And then effectively what happened was we didn't hear anything till about February.
From the buyer?
Yeah. Everything slowed right down. Momentum was completely lost. It created a huge amount of uncertainty.
And what was the seller doing?
Being quite anxious. I think he felt probably like there's a bit of loss of trust because of what was agreed, how they'd gone out, how everything was almost handshaking in that sort of term, and everyone felt part of the same almost team in that moment. To then not have communication from that point onward made it really, really tricky. So I think that is where there was some strain in the deal because of that lack of communication back from the buyers, whether it was to us and then through to our client or even to the client directly because of that relationship.
And did they go silent?
I think we were caught in just the perfect storm. So what I think was going on behind the scenes was the buyer was actually going on quite an aggressive acquisition spree. So they were looking to acquire quite a number of companies. They'd done an equity raise themselves previously, so they were armed, ready to go with a big kind of war chest of cash to go and buy. I think at that point, what they realized was internally, they didn't have the right structural framework or even team to diligently play that out. So what was happening in the background was they were building that whilst dealing with this transaction. And effectively, we were kind of a guinea pig, parts of it. And so things would happen, things wouldn't happen. People were brought in on their side. There was new committees formed, new personnel coming in that wanted to understand the deal, even though we'd worked with the key stakeholders at the time. But that was all being formulated. So it was just unfortunate in that sort of sense that the buyer they were where they were. Then what happened to slow it down kind of even further and compound the problem with the aggressive nature of going after these acquisitions, there were other acquisitions that then they were completing or transacting with that was then competing with this one in terms of resource and personnel on their side to help close the deal.
Yeah, so they were like prioritizing other acquisitions without really having the foundation or division in their organization really working at its best. Yeah.
They didn't have a fluid operating system there. But, the good news is it's helped them gain that. So they're in a much better place now too.
So what you got this really anxious client, you've heard nothing from the buyer. So what did you do? Like, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, fundamentally staying calm.
Yeah.
Trusting the process, trust the original conversations, trust that, I'd heard the snippets of what was going on, these new teams, new committees, etc., and understanding that this is what happens in large corporations. Things don't happen overnight. The bigger the business, often the slower things are to happen. So it was still working from that point of real trust that what had been agreed will eventuate. We've just got to take it step by step and understand where they're at.
You use the word trust because it just underpins everything inside a transaction. And without it, transactions are virtually impossible. And this was just a funny example because both parties went out literally partying on someone's company credit card all night long thinking that there was a deal that was done, and then everything went silent, and all the seller and you have to really to rely on is actually that party in some ways, not what was really in the deal room, or not what was really negotiated in the boardroom rather, but actually the parties had spent together. And I remember thinking and hearing this story at the time going, why would they go silent after taking out the seller, and taking them out drinking all night, but then they go silent? That just didn't make any sense. So how did you get it back on track, and did you develop other engagement? Like how did you get things feeling fair again?
Yeah, I guess that's where, there was some, from my end, looking at it from a strategic but also tactical point of view. So it had gone slow. We needed to get the momentum back. So it really felt like time, and also a bit of an insurance policy here, that if that trust had been eroded, if things didn't pan out as expected, then I wanted to ensure that we had other buyers ready to go to complete a transaction. So we really stepped up that engagement with some of those interested parties, really brought them back to the table after assuming, we were going to have a signed term sheet. So it's bringing them back in, really to G them along, to really create that momentum again, so that they are aware that things can't just go necessarily at the pace that maybe they wanted. So I think that was what happened. So when they knew we were having other conversations and other things were happening, that gave them a little bit more momentum, a little bit more enthusiasm to get back on track and to close the deal in an appropriate time frame based on when we'd had that boardroom discussion.
There was a performance period associated with this transaction.
I'm glad you brought that up, because this ties in really well. Because if I think where we were talking about a performance period, which was going to be for 12 months, this was, to give on both sides, reduce the risk for the buyer that the is going to perform as expected, and that those underlying earnings in that business is robust as stated. So we said we'd have a 12-month period, but what we wanted to ensure was that 12-month period became fixed, because we'd seen the slowdown, we'd seen the loss of momentum. And what we felt was, based on the business itself and how...
What do you mean fixed?
So the time period. It was going to be for a 12-month period, but that's not it will start once we have signed terms, or we have done this, or we have completed. It wasn't going to be a 12-month post-completion necessarily. It's going to start on the 1st of April, whilst in tandem we're still going through the final negotiations, it going through their review committees, their investment committees, etc., to make sure that they were happy. And one of the key reasons for that was to give our client the certainty for what period he was engaged with, for the business to perform at the rate that it needed to perform at. Because in terms of being forward looking, he's constantly looking around 9 to 12 months in the future.
Yeah.
So if the period kept moving along, then it's contracts are coming down, the time period's coming down.
It gets really unpredictable. And
100%. It's very, very difficult. And when I look at the structure of the deal, as it turns out, in terms of upfront completion versus the deferred earnout component, we're roughly talking 40, 60%. Now, it's 60% because actually the beauty of the story is he actually achieved the maximum payout. So
above and beyond, actually. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. But that all comes back here, because you had, like, how did you deal with this on the buy side? Because you basically had a retrospective earnout period, like before even the exchange and the completion date, the clock had started on the earnout period. How did you get the buyer to agree to that?
I think that comes back to the boardroom discussion that we had, because when the fundamentals were there and we'd agreed the structure of the deal, what I was saying to them was, we can't allow for momentum slips to impact the structure of the deal. So we've put a stake in this. That is what was agreed to. And effectively, that's what I want you guys to commit to. We have to have that commitment in order to move forward now. And to be fair to them, they stuck to it.
I think that's a really, really interesting point to just highlight, because that was actually the thing that helped get the seller back on track emotionally with these buyers, is that the buyers actually, despite being a significant delay, actually committed to the key terms that were really important to the seller. And it comes back to this trust piece. While they had really eroded trust through just lack of communication and just causing delay, actually what the underlying deal was, they were still committing to. And that was the biggest material element to the client, was the earn-out period. It then brought this level of mutual commitment back to where it should be and became fair again. The minute they said they would agree to that, I remember our client stopped sweating.
Yes. Well, certainly sweating a lot less.
Yeah.
And, I guess the funny part of it was, if we look at, again, really how long it took to close the deal, due to the negotiations, the contracts, the back and forth, but also coming back to what they were building in the background and the other priorities that they had. I think we officially signed at the end of February, and the performance period finished on the 31st of March.
Yeah.
There was effectively 1 month to go. So the beauty then for our client was, every month that transpired, he could review his performance to date and pretty much know and giving himself that certainty and that confidence of where he was going to land. And I think, if I'm then honest, because of that certainty, because he could see the projection he was on, it didn't feel so much of a stretch, even though he did a fantastic job, his team did a fantastic job in achieving that maximum payout, because they went over and beyond the scale in terms of the revenue and the profit growth. It wasn't a big jump. Whereas I think for for sellers, when you're in that moment of it starting today and you've got that 12-month sort of glide path looking forward, that can probably look maybe insurmountable at that point, because there's a long way to go. Whereas by having it step by step, it really helped propel him, I think, and give him that confidence and the team to really push on and deliver that.
And in terms of the high-level components, you'd valued the business, I think, at 2.55. The contract price was, I think, roughly 2.5. What did the seller end up walking away with?
In terms of total cash consideration,
Yeah.
it was just shy of 3.6 million.
Amazing.
So I think it was pretty much $1 million more than definitely hoped for as the best outcome. And if my numbers don't lose me, probably about 1.4 million than the baseline that he was willing to accept right at the very start of conversations.
I think that also highlights as well for sellers out there how much confidence you can give a buyer when you do actually agree to a sensible earn-out period. And there is upside for buyers. You can get more. You just have to wait for it. Your business does have to perform, but it certainly helps to give to walk into the deal knowing that they've got some protections if the business really goes backwards, if it's not that transferable. But certainly for a business that does adopt a sort of an out mechanism that they can offer a buyer, in more cases than not, you will end up with a better outcome. What's one thing that you noticed in the deal about leakage, or where value could potentially leak from the seller, sometimes without really even the sellers knowing until the last minute?
Well, I guess with this particular transaction, if we look at it, there's one key element that jumps out. And this was on working capital target. And the business was sold as a shop. So there's the working capital component as part of this. And if I think back to how we went about it, I think we gave it to in terms of their CFO time to come forward with what their expectations were around that, based on the core fundamentals and financials of the business. And we also went to our client's accountant to provide their view on the working capital of the business. And from memory, both were quite aligned in terms of the approximate number that came out.
Did you agree with that number?
Well, here's the interesting part. Partly, yes. But in terms of a business transaction, no. Because I think what came out of this discussion was, when we're looking at working capital inside a business, operating it, reviewing it, there's that you'd use. And that's absolutely right. However, when we're looking at a business sale and the acquisition from the buyer's view, there's a slight nuance to that calculation. And what that is as simple as, is cash is not included. So we were then able to demonstrate from our side, and really knowing the inside of business transactions, was to say, well, we see what's laid out in front of us, but here's actually how we see it being formulated as part of this transaction. And by doing that, we got both parties on board. We came to a much closer number to where we had formulated it, excluding the cash component from working capital. And the upside more than outweighed all of our fees from the start of the campaign right through to the conclusion. And I think it was that attention to that detail and really looking at the nuance of how this has been put together and being able to guide our client through the years of experience in the transactions that we know, that really is the best way to formulate this.
I just love that you've done that as well, because you actually had the buyer and seller effectively agree in principle on what the working target would be. And you just went in there and created friction, unnecessary friction, but your client hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you didn't have to do that at all. In fact, that's what actually probably caused a week or two of delay towards the final stages as well. Because when you've got your client's accountant agreeing with the buyer's position, they're going to give their client advice, and that client is going to look to them. I think 99.9% of brokers would not step in there, and you.
Well, thank you. Well, I will acknowledge, I think it was a team effort between us all. So I'm not going to take all the credit. But no, I think that part there, I think really, as VBA, as who we are as human beings, it's really ensuring that it's not just about a transaction.
Yeah.
It really is about how can we ensure we create the best financial outcome for our client, looking at the deal in all of its merits, holistically, from top to bottom, ensuring that every part of it gives them the best chance and the best opportunity to maximize their return. For something that this client had run this business and started it from scratch and run it for 30 years.
Yeah.
He's only going to sell it once.
Yeah.
And I think the outcome has proved into where it landed that we have a very happy client. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think everyone left that transaction feeling like they'd won? Like, what was really important to the seller?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a few elements to it. And it doesn't go without saying that the financial side of it absolutely is key. There was a baseline. We've talked about what it achieved, and that was. But actually, the seller, because he'd been in that business and started it for such a long period of time, had a great team in there. And I'd say his operations manager, I think it was, who's one of the key personnel within that business, was actually like a family friend because they'd been together so long. And what was really key for him, not just for that member of the team, but for the rest of the team, was to ensure that going forward, their opportunities as individuals could be maximized. So again, when we come back to the right buyer fit and being the strategic company operation of a much larger footprint, this now gives those team members opportunities that they wouldn't have had before. So as much as I think it was a great success for our client financially, I think it's a great success for all the humans within that, certainly on the selling side, as we've described. But if we then just move over to the buy side for a minute, right at the start of this conversation, we were looking at how it gave them an opportunity to get a foot in the door with some major clients and really help them grow their revenue footprint on the eastern states. And so they were happy internally, the operations team, the sales team, their finance team, and fundamentally the shareholders of that business. So if we look at that all the way from the corporate down to the human element of it, I think this is one of those examples which I guess is always the goal, to have such a win-win in so many areas. It's not always possible, but this is just one of those deals where it was. And I think it's a great result for everyone. So everyone does walk away feeling like they've got a win.
Yeah. In looking now with the benefit of hindsight, would you have done anything differently?
Yeah, I mean, what jumps out for me around this particular deal, and when we think about the longevity of it, it was quite a long and protracted campaign from start to finish. I think where I could have helped keep some of the momentum and keep speed in there was just around my strategic insights into the deal. So where I could feel things were either slipping, where things needed to be brought to the attention of whoever it was within that deal, maybe I second guessed myself a couple of times. And so therefore that gave me a great opportunity to reflect on the deal and see actually that was right in the moment. And therefore I could have put my foot on the accelerator a little bit harder on that and moved more cleanly and swiftly and confidently with that. So yeah, I think that's given me a great reflection there that, you know, I love the saying, trust your gut and trust the instincts. And they were certainly there, but it's just coupling that with technical knowledge and experience and just bringing all together and being firm with it.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really great reflection. And as soon as uncertainty sort of creeps in, it spreads like bacteria so quickly to everyone in the deal. You know, and sometimes the broker actually, you've almost got to be immune to it, and you've got to be the voice of reason, the calm character, actually try to neutralize it by just bringing calmness to the deal and to every conversation. And as you said, a big part of that is just backing yourself, being headstrong in your gut feeling, your commercial instinct.
No, I'd agree with you, because if I look back at that, by not doing or not acting in that confident, swift manner, knowing what I felt and knew, that can also create uncertainty and noise in the deal, where actually we needed that calm, steady, firm. This is where it is. This is where we're at. This is how we're going to move forward. Got trust in the deal. It is happening as it's. There's been no slippages. That's okay. We'll work through the working capital piece step by step with everyone. We'll get everyone to the same point, even if it takes us a bit longer. Yeah.
Mate, thank you for just taking the time to share some of this transaction and some of the observations that you made within it. Great transaction, and certainly wish the seller and the buyer and all the people in the deal the best. Thanks for watching, folks.
Thanks very much. Cheers, Dan. I really appreciate it.